my friend says caffeine's a drug. I said, oh, tell your friend, fuck you.
I don't want to be your buddy, Rick. Just want a little breakfast.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to Breakfast Punks Podcast, a podcast about coffee, donuts, DIY punk, and pretty much anything else we want. Brought to you by Sham City Roasters and Deadbeat Donuts from Hastings. I'm Siobhan.
And I'm Dave.
And on this episode, we're going to attempt to discuss Dischordianism. And we watched the film Blood Diner from 1987, which is a royal treat.
It certainly is.
Yeah, it is. Oh my god, so good. Each week we drink a different coffee and eat a different vegan treat from an independent business of some sort. So Dave, what are we drinking?
This week we're drinking Zapatista Coffee, which has come from Chiapas in Mexico. There's a really long history with this coffee, which is extremely complicated. But as I think probably a lot of people know, Zapatista Coffee is made both by and to benefit the revolutionaries in the Chiapas area of Mexico, who since the 90s have been in a constant struggle with the Mexican government. I got this coffee through Active Distribution, who are an anarchist distribution network. They sell some music, they used to sell a lot more, but now it's mostly books, and they also distribute this coffee in the UK. I would definitely recommend getting it. It's delicious coffee, but it's also for a really good cause.
Hey, coffee's great. And Active Distribution have that shop, or did used to have a shop in Elephant
Do you know what? I mean, since we've left, I used to go there all the time, and I have no idea now. 56A Info Shop. I feel like Elephant and Castle has been gentrified so much that I'd be surprised if it was still there.
Yeah.
Because it was a squatted area that had like a bike workshop and a bookshop and a library and an info, general info shop. It was an incredible place.
That'd be amazing if it was still there. Anyone who's in London or Elephant Castle, let us know if it's still there. We're intrigued. I just like hearing it. Comes up in lots of your childhood stories, teenage stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like it.
Good.
Even though I don't think I've ever actually even been there. I like hearing about it.
I thought we went there once. No, maybe not.
I don't think we ever managed to.
I went there on my own a lot. Didn't have many anarchist friends.
Dave the anarchist on his own, 14. Bless.
Yeah, that's about right, really.
So, food-wise, we ate these delicious sourdough sandwiches from a company called Plant the Seed. They are a couple that have moved from Walthamstow really recently down to Hastings and started this business in the initial lockdown back in Walthamstow, delivering vegan sandwiches direct to people's houses, and since moving to Hastings wanted to carry on doing the amazing sandwich work. So we took advantage of this and got some sandwiches. They offer 3 different ones. We went for this eggless mayo, which is like a tofu egg mayo sandwich, but instead of eggs it's tofu.
It was very eggy.
But amazing,
delicious. Yeah,
amazingly
the most eggy
so.
Vegan thing I think.
But like eggy, but not. It was eggy in a subtle way. It wasn't eggy in a trying to be an egg.
No,
like
it was
wasn't.
nice, like an
Some
egg.
things are overly eggy, and there's so much of that weird salt in it. Yeah. But anyway, this was amazing. And then we had an MLT, which was like mushrooms cooked in a maple bacony seasoning, with lettuce and tomato. Anyway, it was amazing. They do another one, a chickpea tuna one, which we didn't have. Maybe next time. But they're massive, they're huge. If you're in Hastings and you fancy some of these big sandwiches, take a look. They've got an Instagram page, and through that they've got a website as well where you can order all the sandwiches. Well worth a look. We were not disappointed.
We were not. Check it out.
Yeah.
So let's start with a song, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
So first song we're going to play is by an amazing band who I'm sure you've all heard of.
Aww.
I hope, called the Kimberley Stakes. They've been around for quite a while. They're from Scotland.
I have a favourite story about the Kimberley Stakes.
Oh, okay.
It's not very exciting. We got a megabus overnight for about 12 hours one day to go to a £5 gig that Kimberley Stakes were putting on, or they were at, and Lemonades, their other band, were there. And then got the megabus
Oh, they were
next
doing
day.
a Teenage Bottle Rocket cover
That's
set.
what it was, because bless Brandon passed away, hasn't he? So anyway, Kimberley Stakes, you are very loved in this household. We'd get a megabus overnight for you. Anyway, I'm going to shut
I
up.
don't know why we did that. I think we were just in a different part of our lives where we would get on megabuses and just go to.
We were really into the
gigs all
megabus
time.
at that point.
We were,
all the
I
way
like
to
them.
Dundee.
Yeah. I'd
Oh no,
still
that was
like to be on the
Glasgow. That
megabus.
one.
I think there's only one megabus out of Hastings, and it goes like 3 times a week or something. Otherwise, I'd be on it all the time. Plus lockdown.
Yeah. Anyways,
Anyhow,
sorry about that interlude.
this song is from their new album Confessions of a Justified Cynic, which is out now on Brassneck Records. It came out at the end of last year. It's a fucking great album. Definitely check that out. And the song is called Nothing to Think About.
I'm lying wide awake and it's 4 a.m. I've got to be up for work in 3 hours again. I can't establish communication with my brain, and I've only got myself to blame. We didn't need a shift in front of my TV, playing hardline Miami, German, Witcher 3. I hate to advocate retreating off on me, but they've always worked for me, because I spend most days doing a job I hate and dreaming up another scheme to get out. Feels like my mind has got a mind of its own sometimes, but I've got nothing to think about. Sucking up more, prison up a carpet now, and I think I'm almost as worn out. Up in my mind's got a mind of its own sometimes, but I've got nothing to think about. No, I've got nothing to think about. No, I've got nothing to think about. So I just lie here and hope everything works out.
Good evening, everyone, and the highlights of the news this Thursday.
Breaking news is part of this job.
You are fake news.
This is what's happening in your world tonight.
It's a fucking news.
And now's the time for our fortnightly roundup of the news, or what's important to us that's happened in the last 2 weeks.
Things
Maybe
that have
not.
caught our eye.
Yeah, I mean, we don't actually watch the news, so apologies if something really big happens that we're ignoring. It could be exciting, but we wouldn't know about it. First of all, we've got some music festival news. What's It Called Fest, our punk festival down here in Hastings, has a couple of day tickets left for the Friday,
yeah.
and that's it. Otherwise, it is entirely sold out, which is amazing.
You can come
And-
on the Sunday.
Oh,
The Sunday's free. You can just come.
Sunday's free, and it's going to be
It's
like acoustic, maybe
bit-
a little bit of
bit of
spoken
poetry.
word
Yeah.
poetry from said someone on this table.
So
It's
yeah,
not me.
anyone can come to that.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool.
But I mean, you'll have to, you've got to get up with a hangover and be there by about 2.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Everyone else will be in the same boat.
There is something else that there will be tickets for. There will be a basement gig, a basement warm-up gig on the Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
The tickets are going on sale on Friday, so getting quick for that. It's a 50 cap show.
And the bands will have been announced by the time this
I
comes out.
I think so.
So shall we announce them?
No.
Cool.
No, because aren't they getting announced on Friday?
Let's announce it and then I can always cut it out.
Okay, we're announcing the bands. Dave, I don't remember who's headlining.
Cool. So...
No,
So-
I do know who's headlining. I don't know who any of the
alright.
other bands are. Sorry.
So headlining is Nosebleed from Leeds,
Very
which
good.
is going to be fucking mental in the basement.
In that basement?
That's
Oh,
gonna
my
be
lord.
Absolutely incredible and extremely exciting. And also Bitterman, Bitterman
Bitterman.
from Portsmouth.
Yes, I think you're right. I've never
Yeah, I
actually
think
seen
I'm
them. Have I
right
seen
too.
them? Don't know.
And then another band,
A mysterious band that no one's heard of called A Comeback Clip.
brand new band from Hastings,
Sounds weird saying that out loud.
featuring some people that you may or may not know.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Do you want to say anything more about that, Siobhan? Or-
No comment.
Okay, we can move on.
More on that at a later date. So that's What's It Called Fest basement show. Tickets going out on Friday. Lineup hopefully has already been announced. If not, we've ruined it. And another festival that got announced in the last couple of weeks is Nice as Pie Race, which is Pie Race meets Nice as Pie. And they're putting on a festival in November. They haven't announced any bands yet, but 50% of tickets have already gone. Maybe even more by now, because that was a week ago. So if you want to get in on that, get in quick. I've never been to Pie Race, but Nice as Pie was amazing. You played the last Pie Race.
I did.
2018.
We did, yeah. That
And
was great. It was
I mean,
amazing.
Wharf Chambers is insane.
No, it's
Teeny
a brilliant
tiny,
place.
amazing
Yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah. And they do espresso tequila. Which will make you mad.
And pies. There's pies.
Yeah.
You can eat pie and gravy and mushy peas all day long.
If you drink too much espresso tequila,
Yeah.
then the idea of eating a pie becomes less of interest.
I-
As a number of people proved the year that
I'm so wrong in the other way around. When I went to Nice's Pie, I was
bet
like,
you had everyone's
I had
pies.
so many pies, I got really unwell. So it is what it is.
But yeah, definitely make it. I mean, it's really exciting, I think, at the moment, because whilst obviously we're all a bit unsure as to whether these things are going to happen or not, there seems to be a lot of gigs and festivals and things that are starting to announce themselves for later in the year. I think everyone's aware of the potential of them not happening if something goes wrong or whatever. But I don't know, it's getting me a bit excited and a bit pumped up about the possibility of actually playing a gig or going to a gig. I think Hayes have booked about 5 or 6 for later in the year. So fingers crossed.
Fingers
I suppose
crossed.
that's all we can do, really, isn't it?
Positive thinking for the rest of the year.
I've got a little bit of Sham City Roasters news. Hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, I will have worked out all of the technical things that I need to work out. That this will
believe in you, David.
This will have all been announced via the official channels, but if not, this is an exclusive. I'm going to be doing 2 brand new coffees and releasing a t-shirt to go alongside them. It's been a little while since I did any short runs. We got into a routine last year of probably doing one every couple of months. These actually aren't going to be short runs. They're going to be forever coffees to sort of join the 3 main ones that we've already got. We will be doing more short runs as well in the future. But I wanted to do a couple of coffees. So our original 3 coffees that we've been selling now for 5 or 6 years, and I think everyone's kind of used to them now, were all based on sort of London-based things.
That's where you were at the time,
because that's
wasn't
where
it?
I started the company. Yeah. And so there's White Riot is obviously named after the Clash song, and the Brixton Riots, and In the City is the Jam song, and London Strong Man was just something I made up.
Very good.
So I wanted to do something that was more Hastings centric to sort of obviously we've been down here for more time than we were in London since running the thing. So I've picked out a couple of characters from Hastings for the sort of branding, and I've gone back to Dan Allen, who drew up all of our original artwork in the first place. And so I'm launching 2 coffees, one of which is called Identity, which is an Ethiopian. It's going to be a light and medium roast. It's really delicious bean. And the branding on that is based around Polystyrene, who is obviously the singer of X-Ray Specs, and has 2 different sort of relationships with Hastings. She spent the last part of her life living in St Leonard's, but she was also inspired to start X-Ray Specs when she saw Sex Pistols play on Hastings Pier, which is quite cool. And the other one, completely different figure of Hastings past, is the branding's based on, which is called Drink What Thou Wilt, and is a Brazilian medium and dark roast. Is based on Alistair Crowley, who also spent the last part of his life living in Hastings. The artwork for Drink What Thou Wilt will also be on a t-shirt, which again, hopefully you will be able to see if you go and have a look at any of the Sham City Roasters' various internet presences.
Preseyes.
I think it's how the cool kids describe.
I'm sure they say
the
internet presence.
I'm pretty sure they do.
You are a present to the internet, David.
But that should all be on pre-order when this podcast goes out, and everything will be sort of ready to go at the very start of April. The t-shirt I probably won't be getting that many of, so you might want to get in there to pre-order it if you want one, and certainly if you want a size that isn't medium or large, to be honest, because those will be the ones I'm getting extras of. So check it out, www.shamcityroasters.com.
Very nice.
On the internet.
On the internet. So another thing that we watched in the last couple of weeks, which I imagine many of you have, and if you haven't, definitely strongly advise you to go do it. The new Adam Curtis documentaries, although I haven't written down what they're called,
Can't
which
get
is stupid.
you out of my head.
Can't get you out of my head. It's a 6-part thing on BBC. They range between an hour to 2 hours long each one.
I think the whole thing, because it works as one thing, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And I think the whole thing is 8 hours in total.
That's it. I think there's 2 that are 2 hours, and everything in the middle is an hour.
Yeah.
It's really worth a watch. If you've watched any of Adam Curtis's documentaries before, they come with this weird bittersweet view of the world that's it feels a bit pessimistic at first, but it usually ends with some kind of form of optimism of how the future's going to
I
go.
think this one was a bit more positive, actually, than some of the other ones, to be honest.
It felt it. I mean, it's really hard to describe exactly what it's about. Dave listened to an interview with him where he barely described what it was about during that.
Well, I think
because there's so much to describe.
Yeah, there's so much information involved, and the points. There's both a lot of points, and they're quite complex.
Yeah.
They're points, and they all do make one whole.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a very complicated thing to just put into words in a couple of sentences, I think, which I appreciate doesn't really sell it very well.
I mean, it's if you've watched any of his documentaries before, he's got a very particular viewpoint on the world, the establishments that have been running it and why they run it, and he's very anti-capitalism, but he does it in a very neutral kind of, he just expresses all sides very well. I wouldn't say he's necessarily
I think him as there's a lot of points that he makes which are very much like sit in with a kind of anarchist viewpoint, but I definitely don't think that he himself is an anarchist in any way. I think one of the things he does really well, which I think sometimes causes people to fall out with him a little bit or fall out with his films a little bit, is giving both sides of
he gives all sides.
So many arguments. And so it's not as simple as fundamentally he's definitely very left leaning and definitely, I think generally probably has a similar-ish outlook on the world to probably most people that would be listening to this podcast. But he's definitely also willing to see a lot of different perspectives.
So, didn't really explain what this documentaries are about. My take from it is it's lots of different viewpoints over history about how things should be run, how things should go, how to create a good world, how everything can run smoothly. And he basically describes loads and loads of different viewpoints throughout history as to how they think it should be done. And pretty much the good points and the failings each time of each one of those things. And the pattern is there's all these people with great ideas, come and do a thing, but eventually it doesn't seem to work. Why is that? And that's one of the loose themes in the background of this documentary. And it's really interesting because, it ultimately is positive, but it does go up and down quite a lot.
I think that's the ultimate point of it, actually, insofar as... And I think he more or less said this in the interview that I heard, although, again, he tried to describe it and ended up talking for about half an hour. But I think the overall point is about the fact that we live in a time at the moment whereby everybody seems to have a really clear idea of how they think the world should be run, on both sides. Yet no one is really doing anything practical to actually change the way that the world is done. And in fact, the world is staying... We're all saying, capitalism is terrible, and we're killing the planet, and all of these different things, but actually everybody's kind of stopped doing anything about it, and no one's actually coming up with any answers to say this is all wrong, we should be doing it this way. And I think I feel like that point has probably upset a few people. I've definitely read a few reviews of this which aren't terribly positive. What I took from it, and maybe this is just me putting my opinions, to something that I've seen, but what I took from it is very much that we sort of do live... I think we all experience this a lot, particularly through social media, of extremely black and white opinions about everything, and everybody is very, very is 100% against something or 100% for it in a way, and I think that's probably where he's stumbled into some criticism from people, because I think what he's more or less saying. And actually, there's by the way, the discussion later about Dischordianism is a lot of that is kind of about a similar sort of thing. Is that there is quite a lot of grey within all of these things, and actually there is, whilst there's a lot of idealism, but there's also a need to sort of be somewhat practical about that idealism.
Yeah.
But it's told via the history of China and the history of Russia and the other interesting points, this is something that he discussed, which I found really interesting, particularly about the stuff about China, is that generally I think, and I think this is true, again, I haven't really watched the news, so I don't really know that this is a current thing, but I can certainly say that a few years ago, a lot of people were kind of worried about China, like this mega power that was going to take over the world, and that they were making all the money and all this.
Well, there's people, I mean, there's interesting minded people that think that about this fucking COVID.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Yeah.
well, in America, there's a big problem with this at the moment, isn't there? There's literally
there's
hate crimes. and
Yeah,
stuff.
hate crimes towards Asians.
But I feel like
People have gone up
that's specifically
ridiculous.
just thick people that think that.
And
they,
here.
Oh, okay.
And here, it's awful.
But it's the stupid people that
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that
They
that's
think
how they
that
got
China's
COVID.
created an illness to screw over the world, and they're like, look, all
Yeah.
the vaccines get made by,
Which I
all
guess
the
is-
PPE gets made by China. It's all this, that, and the other. Yeah. I hear it all the time at work. Sorry, anyone who I work with. But we do work with some thickos.
But I guess that's a symptom of this in a way. But I suppose the point is what I was trying to make was more that China is seen as this absolute mega power that's going to take over the world. But actually, within the context of this documentary that he's gone and sort of followed their path through, actually China's in a total mess. I mean, they're on the they hide it a lot, I think, and they hide that they kind of show a face of looking like they're extremely in control and very powerful, but actually their political system is on the verge of collapse, and their financial system, despite the fact that they're making lots of money, is not quite as perfect as it seems. And I think that there was definitely something in this program that was about that, various different systems that pretended to be extremely powerful and pretended to be extremely all-knowing, but actually behind the scenes didn't have a fucking clue. And that's definitely true of all the history of Russia, under communism and things. It was very much like, show the world that we're doing really well, but actually if you peel behind the thing, it's just people are starving and it's not being run very well at all. But yeah, so I feel like, there's so much in this. I mean, that's only literally the tip of the thing.
But yeah, go give it a watch. I don't know if we've described it in any way desirable to watch, but it is really good, and it's worth your time.
We've mentioned him before. I feel like maybe on the first podcast, and I think all of his stuff is on YouTube pretty much, and I would definitely just watch it. It is. I don't know that this is. Do you think this is the best one to start with?
Well, it's all about the self. So I really like that we watched Century of the Self first, because I think that kind of set up his idea for, because his main kind of interest point is looking at individualism. And how that affects politics and how that affects is an undercurrent theme for the documentary we've just watched. So Century of the Self is really interesting because it's about Freudian ideas of realising that people are self-interested. And people became self-interested because of using Freudian ideas in advertising back in the 1900s, really early on, to market cigarettes and cars and all these other things. And we've become a capitalist free-for-all since then, based on self-interest. So anyway, that's a really good one, I thought, for getting into it. And then Hypernormalization is probably the best one for looking at his worldview and his political the worldview and the political view that he presents in the documentaries. And I would definitely go watch probably both of them before touching this 6-part thing, because this 6-part thing is a bit of a slog if you're not really up for his documentary style. Hypernormalization is still about 2 or 3 hours long. Century of the Self is a good 2 hours long as well,
and they're all very much made in the same sort of way, which is a lot of information. He does a really good job of explaining the information, but it is a lot of information.
It is an awful lot.
I think there's so many different threads that seem completely, I mean, this is what all of his things are like, but they seem completely separate to each other, and then just slowly but surely they all kind of merge into one like world view. It is very much just like taking two completely different things and then making a point based on those things, as opposed to really comparing them at all.
Yeah, no, he's it's more of an essay on his kind of thoughts rather than as straight up just presenting the history. What I would say is, if you're a lay person that doesn't necessarily understand current politics or the last 20, 30 years worth of UK stuff, it's really worth watching, especially with regards to UK and US input into the Middle East, because as someone who's 30, 32 years old, a child, compared to some in the room, I grew up with all of this stuff well underway. So I remember who Blair was from being a kid, and I remember going to Iraq, and I remember 9/11, and I remember
You went
all this.
to Iraq?
I didn't go to Iraq. But I remember all of these things happening, but the lead up to all of that's quite complex, was omitted from my memory because I wasn't necessarily old enough to appreciate it, nor is it something you get talked about in schools because history hasn't gone back that far yet, hasn't become that recent yet. So it's definitely a good thing for just getting a bit more up to date on, I don't know, the UK and the US's input into the world in the more recent years.
And I think how it led to It does lead into sort of Brexit and Trump. And
Oh,
things,
a huge amount, and especially the last documentary kind of whirlwinds it all into. You know, there's a lot of Farage walking down the fucking aisles of some old 15, 6-year-old filled room of just nonsense. Anyway, it was awful.
So red.
Oh, so
red
gammon.
with white tops.
Just awful.
Yeah.
But
white top at the head.
I promise.
Not t-shirt. Although they're probably wearing England shirts too.
I think they probably were. They're waving England flags. Anyway,
Definitely.
I promise you it is positive. We've talked about it a really long time now, so we will move on. But go watch it. Go watch Hypernormalisation and Century of the Self first. If you like them, there's tons of documentaries. Just go watch them all. Good use of your time for the remainder of this lockdown.
And to lower the tone somewhat,
Good.
I've got just a couple of random releases that have caught my eye over the last 2 weeks.
Good.
A couple of books that are coming out quite soon that caught my eye. One of which is the Ronnie James Dio autobiography.
Yes.
The greatest Black Sabbath singer, without question. I think everyone would agree with that.
Of course.
And he was working on an autobiography before he died and almost completed it, but then had the indecency.
How did he
to die.
manage to write it if his hands were permanently in a bullhorn shape?
No, they weren't. They were just very tiny.
Oh.
I think he had to hold the pen with both hands.
Ah.
But yeah, he'd almost finished it, and what he'd done was given over to a guy called Mick Wall. That's kind of like he's written loads of music books, mostly of a similar ilk to Ronnie James Dio. I think he was probably a journalist for Raw Power or Metal Hammer or something in his younger days, and now he writes a lot of books. It's going to be called Rainbow in the Dark. I think by the sound of the synopsis, it's going to be lovely. It's all about him sort of overcoming adversity. I imagine that it's probably also going to be extremely self-centered, but it'll be nice. In that way, Paul Stanley's book is nice.
Oh yeah,
he's
when
obviously
Paul
completely all about himself. But
Paul Stanley sags he's got a small ear, and his
Yeah.
entire life is because he's got a small ear, and everyone doesn't like him because he's got a small ear.
Yeah, he does talk about his ear. Yeah. The other one is Cassandra Peterson, or better known as Elvira. She's written a memoir called Yours Cruelly.
Oh, she's so
It's
good.
good, yeah, she's very good. It's coming out on September the 21st, so it's quite a long way away. Again, just reading through the synopsis, there was a bunch of stuff in there that I had absolutely no idea about, and I think you'll be surprised by some of this, because I'm pretty sure you've not read this before. One of them is going to blow you away. She was the singer in an Italian pop band, like a successful Italian pop band.
Really?
She was discovered by Elvis in Vegas, and then she went to Europe and was in an Italian pop band. But better still, after that, she came back to America. She was in an improv troupe with Pee Wee fucking Herman.
I did know that.
Oh, you did know
I
that.
did know that because I think I follow them both on Instagram and they reference each other quite a lot.
Oh, that's nice.
But,
They're still friends.
They're buddies.
Oh, that's nice.
I know. What a lovely little
Oh, a
friendship
nice
group.
dinner party that would be. Me, you, Elvira, and Pee Wee.
Eating a roast dinner. Oh, so good.
But yeah, so I'm sure that'll be absolutely amazing. It does genuinely seem her life sounds like it's really interesting. She ran away from home when she was 14, and she ended up working in Vegas doing something, and then got picked up, and then later in life, not that much later, but I think she was like in her mid-30s by the time she was discovered to become Elvira, and she's like in her 80s now or something.
She's
She
in
looks
her
like
late
she's about
60s,
40,
early
but-
70s, but she looks very, very young.
Yeah.
I think she's mid 70s actually.
But yeah, Elvira's awesome. Watch her film Elvira, Mistress of the Dark as well if you haven't. I'm sure at some point we'll do it on the
Definitely.
on the trashy movie.
Although
thing,
it's
but
not trash because it's pure gold.
It's fucking brilliant. It's
So
perfect.
good.
And the last one is a music release. It's SNFU are releasing some lost recordings from 2004. They were recording at the time of their album In the Meantime and In Between Time, which is a great album. It was the last album they made with their kind of proper lineup. Chai Pig obviously died last year. He was an incredible person, and SNFU were an incredible band. Still, I think one of, if not the best. Obviously, they were around a lot earlier, but those like epitaph bands that were around in the late 90s making albums, I just think SNFU were amazing and certainly the most interesting of all of those bands. A little twist to this story is that all the members of Propaganda are playing on this thing, and I don't quite know whether it's that they were involved in the original recordings or whether they've got some basic recordings that were left over and now some members of Propaganda have come and sort of added some stuff over the top. So I imagine that will become clear over the time. There's not even a release date for this thing yet, but it's 5 new songs and they're from an era of SNFU where they were still absolutely banging. So I can't wait.
Nice. Yay! I just wanted to add one last little bit at the end of this news section, as it were. It might not be news to anyone else, but it was news to me, and I feel very silly for not having known about this earlier. It's about abortions, and it's about, during the pandemic, the access to abortions, and something that was changed, something that was introduced as of March last year, which is called telemedicine, and it was enabling people who are up to 10 weeks of being pregnant, they could have a pill sent to them in the post. So you don't have to go to a clinic, don't have to go with all the rubbish with the doctors and stuff to get it. And you could do it in the safety of your own home, comfort of your own home, and then it's done in the first 10 weeks. And I only really found out about this via someone I know who used this service, who I didn't realise had used this service. And she said, yeah, I just took a pill at home. I was like, what? That's amazing. Why does this exist? And then the day I looked into it, it turns out that was the last day of this government consultation, which was yesterday, about whether this should continue or not. So, unfortunately, if I'd have found out about this earlier, you could have all gone and given your opinions about whether this should continue or not. I think absolutely it should have continued, and hopefully it will still continue. So just keep an eye on the news, because this may be something that carries on past this pandemic lockdown thing, and that can only be a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, do we have time for a little Norfolk news?
Well, I think we have to have a bit of time for Norfolk news, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
So here we go with some Norfolk news.
Alright, my darlings, I've got a little one for you. It won't be long, because we've had a right old ramble about some of that other stuff that I didn't really quite understand. Sorry, I don't know why I've come back as a completely different person. Now I've lost my accent.
Do you mean the Norfolk version of you didn't understand all the stuff that we've just been talking about? Are you that much into character?
I didn't no. That was all bullshit. Anyways, my darlings, Norfolk ain't had much to go on this last couple of weeks.
They're in a lockdown.
Well, I must say, I go on that adp24.co.uk. I just read that.
Yeah.
And all that's talking about is who's got arrested this week.
You said that last time.
That's every week at the minute. There's nothing else other than when's my old biddy going to get a jab, and who's been robbing the houses round about the way. So that's not very nice. But there are a couple of nice ones in there. Not very exciting, but this one I quite like. It comes with a picture, so I think I'm going to have to link this picture in somehow so you can see it.
Just describe it in detail.
Well, I will. So, worried dog walker rang police after falling for creative mannequin prank. A dog walker called the police after spotting what appeared to be a half a body stuck in a Norfolk edge. But it turned out it was someone else was pulling their leg. God. Kings Lynn, it's over in Kings Lynn, near Downham Market. Kings Lynn police said they were called by a dog walker in Retton. I don't know. That's North Norfolk, and I'm from East, so I don't. Never the twinge of me.
You've got beef with them already. You've already
That's
made
not
that
beef.
clear.
I just don't even know where half these things are. Near Downham Market, I do know where that is. After they saw the suspicious item. But once the officers arrived at the scene, they soon discovered what looked like the bottom half of a man kneeling in a hedge was in fact part of a mannequin.
It was basically just a bum poking
It's just
out
a bum
of
and
it,
legs
isn't it?
pointing out of her. It had been dressed up in a pair of blue jeans, black trainers, and was realistic enough to concern the dog walker. And that's literally where it ends.
Oh, Norfolk.
I know, but the picture is quite wonderful. It's got this mannequin hanging out of the hedge, and the police just looking despairingly the other way.
The picture is funny, but it's not good content on radio, really, a picture, is it?
I mean, what I would say, as Norfolk, you ain't really got much to show us this week, which is a bit sad. If you've got a better Norfolk story, my Norfolkians that are giving us a listen, please let us know, because I don't really see much on the websites.
Oh,
that's a shame.
this is a very sad
That's a
episode
shame.
of Norfolk News.
I know.
You sound so dejected.
Well, there weren't much out there. That was just all this sadness about people getting arrested.
The trouble is, you blew your load a little bit in the first weeks because you were sometimes doing two.
Well, that's
You should have saved them
That's
up.
because some of those weeks there was loads going on. I cannot deny looking for things on the internet. No, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, if I scroll down, it just says these people are responsible for 200 burglaries.
Burglaries?
I don't fucking know. There's a bungalow in Crome that's going to get demolished, and it's just all
Please,
bullshit.
if you have any local news that's funnier than a pretend man in a hedge, send it to shamcityroasters@gmail.com. Should we play some music?
Yeah, let's do that. Apologies.
So the next song is by a band called Electric Press, who are a newish band from Leeds. The song's called I Will Not Apologise, and it's from their forthcoming album, which is called Ragwort, which is coming out on the 19th of March. They've actually just released another song from it on Spotify as well, called Me and Also You, but we're going to be playing I Will Not Apologise because it's a fucking banger.
Whoop, whoop.
So here we go.
Welcome back to Breakfast Punks podcast. We are now going to, for our main bit today, have a discussion around a subject that kind of came into our lives around lockdown last year. And when I say our lives, I very much have learnt this via Dave. So beginning of lockdown, we're bored, get loads of books. And Dave got a book that seemed like it was going to be about the KLF, a band from the early 90s, late 80s, kind of like rave scene. It looks like it's going to be about this band, and it turns out it's about lots of weird and wonderful other things. And one of the main themes that they discuss is this idea of Dischordianism. And it kind of links to some of the weird and wonderful things that the KLF did, which I imagine might get mentioned in a bit.
And also, just to say, it was brought up in the Adam Curtis documentary that we watched. So if you watch the Adam Curtis documentary, you'll be vaguely aware of a man called Kerry Thornley, and also Operation Mindfuck, which I will describe in more detail in a little while. But those were definitely two things that were in that.
Yeah, they were quite early on in that documentary. So the way that this bit's probably going to run is more Dave is going to more or less explain to me and to you very briefly the ideas around Dischordianism, what came out of it, who's involved, and just why it's really interesting. And it's definitely affected our lives over the last months, in as much as just learning about it and learning about these really wonderful ideas about the world, especially linked to that documentary with all these other people's got ideas about how to run the world. If more people were Discordian, then fuck knows what would happen. It'd probably be a right mess. But
yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably seeped into a lot of culture that you wouldn't know was directly linked to it. Like a really good example is the KLF. Like if you just knew the KLF as sort of a pop band in the late 80s, early 90s, which I'm sure most people don't. But if you remember them, you might remember a couple of their songs. You definitely wouldn't think to yourself, God, I bet there's a really interesting story between those two. I bet they do loads of weird and wonderful things.
Yeah.
And they did end up doing a lot of weird and wonderful things, which we'll talk about. But I think I think it's seeped into culture.
But isn't the weird and wonderful thing about Discordianism is no one else necessarily even really knows what's going on.
No.
So people who are doing Discordian stuff
Yeah.
and then might be affected by something else and not know that the tween will meet.
Yeah,
like.
unfortunately, that's why a lot of them became very paranoid.
Yeah, well,
and
you will
suffer
find
from
out
a lot
about
of mental illness. But yes, you're right. Also, just as a proviso, I mean, I'm not neither an intellectual nor an academic nor a storyteller, so I'm just going to have a go. Some of this information might not be 100% right. I'm basically just doing this as someone who's read an awful lot of books about it and kind of done a bit of a deep dive about it since I've had some time on my hands.
Yeah.
So if you happen to have stumbled across this podcast and you're a sort of weathered Discordian and I get a couple of dates wrong, I apologise, but do expect that. And if it's going to offend you, just turn off now. Probably a bad idea, really. But I'm just going to have a go, see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's not meant, like Dave said, it's not meant to be intellectual or anything like that. This is literally something that's really interesting, that's interested us last year or so, or in the last year.
Yeah, but unfortunately it is a very complicated subject.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I guess we're bringing it up because we just watched that Adam Curtis documentary and lo and behold, within the first 10 minutes this is mentioned, so we thought we would have a go at thinking about it for a bit.
Okay, well, Discordianism is either a complicated joke disguised as a new religion or a new religion disguised as a complicated joke. That's how it's often described. It was started by two people, Kerry Thornley, who, like I say, popped up in the Adam Curtis documentary and had a very interesting story of his own, which I'll try and cover in a little while, and a guy called Greg Hill in the 1950s. It's based on the worship of the Greek god Eris, who is the god of chaos and discord. So, whilst it isn't a religion in the context of probably any other religion, they kind of use the idea of a religion to sort of base a, maybe to some extent philosophical, to some extent political concept around. They came up with this idea famously in a bowling alley, and as a result, all bowling alleys are sacred to Discordians. They started off with they wrote a zine called Apocalypse, a trade journal for doom prophets, which more or less, it was sort of just this nonsensical fanzine really that they were kind of giving out, and it more or less turned into what is sort of their religious text, which is the Principia Discordia. To describe Discordianism is very difficult. I think the basic idea of it is that if you do loads of really weird shit, it will shock people out of their comfortable reality and kind of wake them up. It's a very sort of 60s hippy-dippy kind of concept, and it's definitely, it was all obviously made, or a lot of it was made at that time, so it does have an air of very 60s things. There was a lot of sort of vague revolutionary ideas in there. Like I say, it wasn't exactly a political group, but they did talk a lot about kind of the order games that make up our routine living. So their ideas were really just to sort of fuck with people's minds so that they would realise that in the 50s and 60s they were, and to this day really, they were sort of living in very ordered worlds. There's a number of different ideas which I won't probably be able to cover all of them, but they have they have some katmas instead of dogmas. So the dogmas obviously in normal religions are like set rules which can't be broken.
They're like absolute truths, aren't they? Yeah.
Whereas katmas are basically things that are they're sort of, you can do them if you want, but you don't really have to do them. And an example of a katma is you're not allowed to eat hot dog buns on Fridays.
Is it Friday? I thought it was just any time.
I
Is it?
I think
it
maybe you're allowed to eat them on Fridays, but you can't eat them.
There's a rule that you can't eat a hot dog bun.
Yeah, but so when it's like a lot of Discordian events, people make a point of eating hot dogs outside of their buns, for example.
So the point is that it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we've made it a truth that you can follow, or you don't have to follow. It is what it is.
Yeah. One of the sayings that comes out of the Principia Discordia, which I think pretty much sums this up, is that all affirmations are true in some sense, false in some sense, meaningless in some sense, true and false in some sense, true and meaningless in some sense, false and meaningless in some sense, and true and false and meaningless in some sense. And the point of that, I think, is that basically there are no absolutes, really. And again, it kind of comes back to that thing that we were talking about before, about like there isn't really a black and white answer to or in their eyes, there's not really a black and white answer.
Well, and that goes into ridiculous amounts of things. It's like the truth, you know, the things that you think is the truth, someone else doesn't think is the truth, and both have evidence for those things.
Well, I think that's probably one of the reasons why they based it in a sort of religious context, because obviously religion deals with absolute truth in all of its things. And, you know, if you're a Christian, you can't question the Bible. Yeah. But whereas in Dischordianism, there's no straight answer to anything.
And I guess, and maybe I'm taking this wrong, but it means that there's no less worth in what... Like, everyone believes their own thing. So, like, people who are Christian absolutely believe that Christianity is the way. People who are Muslim absolutely believe Muslim is the way. People who believe there's nothing absolutely believe that there's nothing. And you could just choose anything out of thin air and believe it. And is that any less, or, you know, what's proven, what's not? Like... This text that come out of nowhere proves this thing exists. So they wrote a book and said, well, look, this proves our thing exists, like, and we do our thing. One
of the things is that you can take things from all of those places.
Yeah.
So if it's useful for you to believe in Jesus, you can believe in Jesus, but it doesn't mean that you have to believe in everything else or do any of the things other than the bits that work for you. So, it's quite it's a very individualistic sort of concept.
And I guess that's quite anti people who are I can't think of a better word, super religious, but what's that, devout? Can't remember the radical with their beliefs, because people who are radical, you know, believe in everything, but then in all these religious texts there's a mental thing that makes no sense nowadays. But if they're to not believe that, then their whole world's going to fall apart and they don't believe it. You know, they have to believe in absolutely everything to it.
Yeah,
it makes no sense.
which I think is also where a lot of, obviously, like religious wars and wars generally and kind of differences between cultures and nations come from a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's another thing that came out, you know, that Discordian sort of talked about a little bit was that if everybody kind of just believed in a bit of everything, then there would be no need to war. Again, it's very 60s, very hippie. There would be no need to fight. Robert Anton Wilson talked about that thing of getting rid of the word is.
Oh, I love, literally. Since we learned about that, that's such a good way of life.
So it's not like that song is rubbish. It's that song isn't really what I want to, you know.
You say, I feel that song isn't good.
That song isn't as good as another song, or whatever. And I think it's quite a good, it's like all wars were built on is. All wars were built on, or are, you know, you are this, you are that.
I like that he also said it's a good way to tolerate people who are intolerable. Like, he said he used to watch George Bush say is and is and is on the TV about his opinions, and he was like, he's a lot less hateable if you replace that is with I think, or this is how I feel. You think, oh, he's just a person trying to make some decisions.
Robert Anton Wilson's very wise, but we'll get to him. We'll get to him later. He got involved a little bit later on. There's a lot of other nonsense that goes along with Discordianism, which is possibly stuff that I think has kind of come into the more mainstream culture. There's a rule of fives, which I feel like is something that more like a magician, like, you know, ritual magic type of thing. I think they have a rule of fives, which is just a load of nonsense. I can't even remember what it is, but it's kind of like their 10 commandments, and it's literally just like, don't believe in any of these, don't do any of these, or something like that. But yeah, they have there's a lot of kind of number games almost that they play, and one of the big ones is the 23 Enigma, which is definitely something that's like seeped into popular culture. It was something that came from William Burroughs, the beat poet and writer. It's basically that you can kind of see 23 in a lot of places, more or less, that it just pops up a lot. But when you look at, obviously, the sums that need to be done in order to get the 23, sometimes it's like, if you know, if we take your age and my age and divide it by the day that you were born, then suddenly it's 23 or whatever.
But it's also,
it's magic, right?
Once you're, what I like about that is once you're trained to look for 23, you see 23 everywhere, but that's because you ignore all the other numbers you've seen. You ignore everything that doesn't fit your worldview of 23 is a big deal.
Totally.
And every 23 you see is super important and relevant and not just a coincidence.
Which, again, this is going into Robert Anton Wilson quite a lot, but the idea of that is very much that's how you can kind of affect your own reality. Is that if you tell yourself that 23 is a magic number that pops up all over the place, then 23 is going to be a magic number that pops up all over the place. But equally, if you tell yourself you're going to be happy all the time,
Yeah.
you can do the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's all about. Anyway, that's very much about Robert Allen Wilson.
No, but that's brilliant.
Those
are like...
No, I mean, it's great stuff. But the big thing, the big thing that Dischordianism kind of started, if you like, was this project. I don't know if you call it a project. I don't know. With this thing called Operation Mindfuck. And so it was very much sticking with their idea of kind of confusing people into breaking out of their sort of normal reality. And the way that they did it was through a lot of pranks. And because this is in the sort of 50s and 60s, a lot of them were via, like, through the mail, really. And the most famous one was that they came up with this idea that the Bavarian Illuminati were these shadowy figures behind the scenes, kind of in control of governments and corporations and things.
And the Bavarian Illuminati would be like 1800s.
Well, so the Bavarian Illuminati
originally
was a real thing,
Yeah.
but that people generally consider lasted about 10 years.
Yeah.
But they stumbled across it, I think.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it's so far removed from the time they're in. Like, they were thought to be relevant in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And in the 1950s, these guys decided to pretend they were
Yeah,
relevant.
basically. And so they started sending letters to the Playboy letters section.
In amongst other publications, I guess.
I think it started with Playboy. I'm not sure, actually. Yeah, I mean, they were just sending mail everywhere.
Yeah.
So definitely, very quickly, it became everywhere. But the famous one, I think, was...
So what, like...
So there would be, in the Playboy letter section, there would be a couple of... there'd be a letter from someone saying, I don't know, me and my wife aren't having much sex and I want to have an affair. And then there would be the Bavarian Illuminati thing, saying that basically the Bavarian, we are a member of the Bavarian Illuminati, and we're telling Richard Nixon what to do or something. And then underneath that would be a letter about, I don't know, how do I make my girlfriend happy?
And they actually printed it in the Playboy magazine.
Because Robert Anton Wilson, who I keep bringing up, was the letter editor at Playboy magazine.
So that's kind of his way into...
Yeah, I feel like they might have had a connection vaguely beforehand, but I think I think that's more or less it.
Do you think he realised it was a joke, or did he think, what the fuck is this?
No, definitely. Like I say, I think he was in on it.
He was in on it.
At least relatively soon, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how he got involved. But they would also do stuff like they would send out a lot of press releases of like made up from made up places. So they sent out a press release from the American Anarchist Association, whose tagline was "Leadership means taxes," which I really like. And they'd send something out from there, making some point. But then they'd make up an alternative association, like the Stephen Decanter Society, whose thing was "Our Country, Right or Wrong," was their tagline. And then they'd sort of they'd be the same person, but they'd be sending arguments between each other. So one would send a press release out saying one thing, and the other one would send a press release out sort of arguing the fact.
And this complete craziness was just to get people to think,
it was just
what the fuck is going on?
Well, I think Dischordianism, it didn't necessarily have as much of a point as I feel like I'm kind of making it sound like it did have. A lot of it was just for the sake of doing something.
Yeah.
It was just like, and that's kind of what Dischordianism is. It's just like, just do
something.
It's based a lot, I think, on like Dadaism and Situationist International, who were both kind of a similar thing. It was like you put importance in the thing that you're doing, not really what it's actually there for.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something the KLF very much, like in years to come, would very much sort of operate in that kind of way. They did a lot of they sent a lot of letters from the president's office, like saying all sorts of nonsense has happened, like just complete rubbish.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Going back to the Illuminati thing. So is that like these guys just writing into Playboy magazine and doing this silly prank? Mm-hmm. Is that why? Is this the first time that the Illuminati conspiracy kind of started?
So I'm not sure because I'm not an expert on this, but to my understanding,
it does seem it.
I think it's so at this point, the Principia Discordia was like they'd made about. I think they initially made 5 copies and gave them to their mates, and then they kind of made more and more and more. And so it wasn't like this was all just completely going on under the surface. No one knew anything about this whatsoever. And then what happened was when Robert Anton Wilson got involved, he wrote the Illuminatus Trilogy.
Okay.
This is kind of a bit later on, really. But he wrote the Illuminati Trilogy, which is 3 books. They're not an easy read, it's got to be said, because they kind of rely on the idea that they're written in a state of chaos. So halfway through any kind of paragraph, you'll suddenly one person will be talking, and then halfway through it'll be someone else.
Oh, God.
And so you have to kind of really pick it apart. But again, the idea of these books is that it kind of puts you in this uncomfortable psychological state that it's going to break you free of something. That was kind of I'm not saying I don't believe in that really, but that's definitely where they were coming from. But in the Illuminati Trilogy, the main storyline, although there's an awful lot of different storylines within it, is that there's this band of Discordians who are fighting against the Bavarian Illuminati who are running the world. So when this book actually got published, which I think now might even be the early 70s.
I think it
took a long time for
early
it to
70s.
get published, I think. But so once that happened, then I think that's when both Discordianism went out to a wider world, and also the idea of the Illuminati went out to a wider world.
But it's still made up by these guys.
Yeah, and then over time, obviously, all the conspiracy theories that we now know, like the David Icke type stuff, has kind of been spawned in a lot of ways from this, which to some extent is probably the greatest trick Discordianism ever played on the world.
Yeah.
Like it's it
introduced
much as it's,
the Illuminati, the biggest conspiracy theory.
As much as it's like obviously a horrible thing for most of our lives with, QAnon and all this shit.
Oh God.
Like, actually, what a fucking brilliant prank. I mean, they've just, they've got all these people to like, they've changed the world.
Oh yeah, to this day, if someone sees a triangle with an eye in it, they're like, ooh.
Yeah, and that definitely came from all of their stuff is eyes and triangles and stuff. So, so the other thing about, one of the things that I think possibly sums up Discordians quite well, although I don't think I'm going to do a very good job of explaining it, is these things that they called mondos. And so these were things that they don't make sense, but the more you think about them, the more they seem like they should make sense, but they still don't. Does that make sense?
No.
Well, it might make more sense if I give you a few. So an example of a mondo is if the phone rings and you pick it up and you say, "Wrong number, please." So there's another one that someone says, "From now on, do not hit people by mistake." So the point of them is that they kind of sound like
they do.
They kind of sound like
it
makes sense in the context of whatever they're in.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. You say "wrong number" and "please."
I mean, it sounds like Norfolk people getting their words mixed up.
But yeah, I just like that, and I feel like that's kind of says something about Discordian. It's something that doesn't make sense, but the more you think about it, the more it seems that it should make sense.
Yeah.
It's not even. Yeah.
And you sit there thinking about it and re-saying it to yourself, like, "Well, does that? That kind of would." But no, it doesn't. But
of course, to the person, if you did actually pick up the phone and say "wrong number, please," the person on the other end of the line, who could be like a salesman or your mum, would be completely bemused by why someone's done that. And I think the other side of that, and this is definitely something that the KLF did a lot, is to not explain it. Then that's the important thing. You don't sort of do it and then explain. "Oh, that was just a funny mondo. Let me tell you what that is."
Yeah.
You do it and then you just leave the person in like perpetual confusion about why someone would do that.
Yeah.
I quite like that.
That is nice. It says you're on this like inward spiral of like, it brings up stuff about yourself, because then you're like, did they make sense or did I just get this wrong? And then you go on this spiral of, oh my God, what have I do? I don't know anything about myself. Exactly. Yeah, no, that's definitely, I couldn't enter
and
that
then
world.
It breaks you out of your reality.
No, but it's good. I think I can definitely see the worth in it.
Yeah,
just from little bits that I've seen.
And I suppose as well, it's like the this is a weird thing to say, but the whole of it probably does sort of break you out of your reality a little bit. So, for example, I've consumed a lot of Discordian literature over the past year, and it probably has broken me out of my reality a little bit. It's definitely made me look at certain things a little bit differently.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that if I'd got sent a weird letter from the Bavarian Illuminati, it would have done the same. But I suppose as a whole, the thing itself, I think, is quite a...
I definitely agree. We'll get on to Robert Anton Wilson in a minute, I'm sure, but some of the stuff he said just made me think. It makes you question why you worry about some of the things you worry about, and why you... not necessarily why you think some things you think, but the things you worry about in your life is the same as just a thought from someone else. It's just a thing. It just exists, and you can either deal with it or not. You can accept it's real or not. Does it matter? Does it not? It can matter and not matter at the same time. How you deal with it is all about you.
It's all about how you deal with reality itself. And it does get it's an incredibly complex thing to describe.
But it can be quite freeing when you, like, again, we'll get onto his stuff, because some of the stuff he says, I'm like, mate, that just means nothing matters or all matters, and does it matter? Do you care?
Well, it's about you can pick.
Yeah,
and
you can
choose. That's the
pick.
point, really. But yeah, so a really interesting thing about Dischordianism, and one of the reasons why that potentially anyone would have heard of any of this stuff, is that Kerry Thornley, one of the two guys that came up with it, got really mixed up in the JFK assassination conspiracies. And this ended up being a real Discordian sort of plot that he almost played out himself. So there's a lot of really weird coincidences involved. He was stationed, he was a Marine before coming up with Discordianism, and he was stationed with Lee Harvey Oswald, who's the guy who shot JFK or didn't shoot JFK, depending on who you ask. And they became quite good friends. Lee Harvey Oswald is a very unusual man, and he's got a whole interesting story himself. But the simplistic bit of what he did was, once he finished with the Marines, he defected to Russia, like in the Cold War. And so Kerry Thornley knew him as a Marine. They both sort of went home after doing their service. He then started writing a book about Lee Harvey Oswald because he was such an unusual man. And when he heard that he defected to the Soviet Union, obviously that kind of spiced up his. It was like a fictional novel. But in the fictional novel, Lee Harvey Oswald shoots the president. And this was before the JFK assassination. And so he's written this book. It's not been published or anything yet. And then at some point he moves from California to New Orleans. And whilst he's in New Orleans, Lee Harvey Oswald also, who's just moved back from the Soviet Union, is also in New Orleans. But they don't know that neither of them know that each other are there.
So they don't meet up again.
They don't
even
meet
know
up.
that each other is
but they do share a couple of friends. And to make it even weirder, they looked quite similar. So some of their friends got them mixed up. So they had like a lot of, they would like quite sociable
like
people. So mutual acquaintances, really.
Yeah.
So they'd go to the same bars, for example, but they never actually saw each other while they were there.
Okay.
And then he obviously goes and kills JFK.
Is the novel
Or doesn't.
published before?
I don't know if it was before or after.
That's so weird. I didn't know that detail that in the book he shoots. I knew there was a book about him. I didn't know in the book he made up that he shoots the president.
Now you're saying that, I feel like I might have got it wrong, but I'm pretty
that's
sure that I'm almost
crazy.
certain that's right. Anyway, there's so much, but then it's so much weirder than this. So then all of this stuff happens. Lee Harvey Oswald shoots the president, then gets shot himself. Everything goes down, and people start questioning whether he did it or not. And then this guy Jim Garrison, who's the New Orleans district attorney, decides to make it his job to solve who really killed JFK. Yeah. And that's what the film, the Oliver Stone film, is kind of all about. All of these people are in that film. So I think a lot of people will have probably seen that. So he starts looking into it, obviously finds out about all of Lee Harvey Oswald's previous, acquaintances and things, and finds Kerry Thornley, finds out he's written this book, finds out that they were in New Orleans together, and becomes fairly convinced that he was a part of the plot to kill JFK. To make this even weirder, the first copies of the Principia Discordia were photocopied by Jim Garrison's secretary in his office about 20 years before. So famously, like his legal secretary or something was the girlfriend of the other guy who wrote it or something.
Or whatever that was.
So there's all of these really bizarre coincidences. And so Kerry Thornley gets pulled in and questioned, and basically they really think that he's a part of it, so they probably go pretty hard on him. And over time, Kerry Thornley becomes convinced that he was actually involved in the plot, even though he definitely wasn't. And so he became convinced that he had been brainwashed, and he had been part of the JFK assassination.
Because you say there's too many coincidences for me not to have actually been a part of this. Like, how is it that me and him lived in New Orleans at the same time? Yeah. And how is it that the book that I've shared was printed in this man who's now coming after me? I was printed in his office, and it's too coincidental for it not to mean something. Yeah. Which does that not necessarily? I mean, that kind of semi goes against his idea. By this point he's going mad.
I was going to say by this time it was later on in his life, and he'd definitely done too much LSD.
Yeah.
And he became. I mean, he more or less lived the last, I think maybe like 20 years of his life more or less homeless.
I think you're in someone's.
He did Zen dishwashing. He basically just got jobs as a dishwasher and said that he was meditating while he was doing it. And he lived in someone's cupboard for like quite a long time. But he was sort of like a character that would make little pamphlets, and people would give him some money for them, and it just get high. he lived an all right life, but he definitely I think all of these people did a lot of LSD and a lot of drugs generally, and I think probably they all of them ended up quite burnt out, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a brilliant book written about all of this called The Prankster and the Conspiracy, which I would really recommend, written by Adam Go-Rightly, who's written quite a few other things as well about Dischordianism. So then we have Robert Anton Wilson, really, who, following all of this stuff, went on to kind of just continue working within this vague field, although he definitely went way beyond everything. It would be impossible to give you everything that he did, but just to give you a sort of idea, really. Robert Anton Wilson's sort of most famous book is called Cosmic Trigger. There's actually 3 of them, Cosmic Trigger 1, 2 and 3, but I think the first one's probably the most famous one. But in Cosmic Trigger, he decides that he's going to explore the insides of his head, basically. And he comes up with this concept of Chapel Perilous, which is a place, a sort of made-up place, where you put yourself in order to just experience... You just allow yourself to believe in whatever you choose. So, for example, he believed that he was getting messages from aliens, from Sirius.
Yeah.
He believed in ritual magic and Crowley Thelema and all that sort of stuff. He just picked a load of things and basically just really jumped into them and allowed himself to kind of, and he did a lot of he took a lot of LSD, he did a lot of meditation, he did a lot of sleep deprivation, food deprivation, all this sort of stuff to prove is probably not the right word, but to sort of show that like we said earlier, whatever reality you want to choose to believe in, it can be basically true, because reality itself is created in our minds. And there's a lot of sort of pretty standard classic things. There's I think a Zen proverb which is something like, who is the god that makes the grass green?
It's you.
And it's you.
Yeah.
Because actually grass isn't really green, or it isn't the green that you're seeing. Your brain is making it, that colour. The best way that I worked this out to myself when I was reading a lot of this stuff was that if you are having an amazing day and something brilliant has just happened to you, and you go out and walk down a street that you've walked down 100 times, you see it in a certain way. You see, the weather might be nice, the whatever. Whereas if you've just heard that you've lost your job, or you've just broken up with your partner or something, and you walk down the exact same street with the exact same stimulus, you see completely different things. So you'll see a bit of graffiti that makes you grumpy, or you'll see somebody being rude to their kid or something, or you walk down happily and you see a bunch of people that are
I mean, that definitely makes sense. It's the same as if you're an avid reader of The Sun, you're going to see racist shit everywhere, and you're going to be very agreeable to it, and you know what I mean, you see a world in a very tainted way. Whereas one of the reasons we don't watch the news is so that we're not, the bombardment of fear from what you see in the news means that you're not necessarily scared of everyone around you, the news probably tries to make out that you should be.
But it creates a reality, doesn't it? And I think we can all see that in other people, and what Robert Anton Wilson did a good job of is saying, well, what about yourself? Think about what it is that you're allowing yourself to believe in as well. Yeah, like I say, it's really, isn't it? It's so easy. We all look at a Sun reader who's writing racist things on Facebook, and we can all happily figure out what their reality is and how they've ended up getting to that point. But we can't necessarily do that so well about ourselves. Probably the thing that sums it up the best, although this in of itself is quite a complex thing, is there's a quote from Korzybski, who I think is a philosopher, I don't know. Who said that the map is not the territory. So, i.e., looking on a map is not the same as being in the place.
Oh my God! And he's got a good explanation for that.
Someone else says the menu is not the meal, which I think is the same thing. You can look at a menu, you can read a menu, you can know exactly what is in the food that is coming, but the meal itself has nothing to do with. The two things that it's not just, they're obviously based on each other, but they're actually completely different experiences. Looking at a map is not even related to being in the place on the map.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And I think it's like the way that we organise the world and the way that we see reality shouldn't be confused with the world itself, what the actual reality of it is.
That's so true. That's a lot to be said about being told what to think. For example, here's this apple, it tastes sweet, it tastes this. When you bite it, you're going to think it tastes sweet and it tastes this. But if no one had ever said it, you'd be able to make your own opinion on what it was.
Yeah. And also all of our taste buds are different or whatever.
Exactly.
Or like every apple is different.
We all taste different things, we all see different things. He's the one that said that everything is meaningless or meaningful and false and true, and he said something like that, didn't he? He also says, moving on from the map thing, and I think this is really good for the absolute truth we hold in our lives about what's right and what's wrong, and country borders, for example, and his metaphor for it is really, I don't know if you were about to say it.
No.
Didn't he tell the story of he once...
Oh, I know.
What is it? He needed to... You might know better than me.
He moved to a new house.
Oh, and this was his explanation of quantum physics.
Yeah.
He moves to a new house and he gets the note through the door saying he's got something to collect at a post office. So he goes to the post office and they say, oh, well, we don't have your parcel because you don't live in this district, you live in this other district. So he goes to the other post office and they go, well, no, you don't live in this district, you live in this other district. And basically it turns out that his postcode, according to all of the different systems, because I think he ends up going to a GP and to a post office and to a shop. And he goes to all these different places that run different systems. They're all in their systems have him in different places, and he's like, but I live in that house.
I exist.
So I exist. My house exists. My house exists in 3 different places all at once. How can that be? And he likened that to how quantum physics works with an atom being in 3 different places. How light is a wave. Can't remember the other one.
Well, no, it's that light is only a wave if you're looking at it.
But otherwise it's
not.
Yeah.
But that gets into some real deep quantum
But
physics
basically,
shit,
I like the idea of all of those people thought they were right, and they all were right in their systems. Yeah. But he's the sorry sod that's like, well, I'm existing, and I know where my house is. It doesn't matter if it's in your system or your system or your system. I need my fucking parcel. And it just reminded me of loads of different things. You just think, actually, all of you thought it was absolute truth. All of you think you're right, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And you could say that about fucking, any stupid war over who's in which country.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah,
Oh, and that was the other thing he said, I live in all 3 places on that map, but don't forget we drew...
Yeah, we drew the map.
We
made it up.
We made that up one day.
Yeah, particularly when it comes to...
And that's the same about all facts.
Yeah.
Everything we believe is a fact. It's only a fact because we've been told it's a fact. It's no more of a fact than me saying, I'm looking at Dave right now and he's green. To me, he might be green. I don't know.
Yeah, or you might have had an aneurysm. And I might actually look green. In your brain.
I just like this. It becomes a bit more freeing when you're like, does it matter?
Yeah, I think it's very. I think it's freeing because of this idea that you can choose your own reality. Yeah. Really, which I suppose in of it sounds a little bit like a greetings card when you say it that way. But so Robert Anton Wilson, like I say, he's written loads and loads and loads of books. But Cosmic Trigger is definitely the one. Prometheus Rising is really good as well. And there is a documentary. It's not the greatest made documentary in the world, but it is on YouTube. I have no idea what it's called, but if you put in Robert Anton Wilson documentary, it'll come up.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's
called. It's more or less just him talking. And at this point, it was made really late in his life. He died in about 2004. And he was really ill before he died, and so he's really not doing that great. But it jumps around a lot time-wise, so you see him as a younger man as well talking about this stuff.
And he's just so positive throughout the entire thing. It's a man who's got post-polio some kind of illness, syndrome. Yeah. He's so ill and he's just so upbeat and positive still. And he lived, to a long life, and that's probably got a lot to be said for his way.
So I don't think I've done a very good job of explaining Dischordianism exactly. I would definitely look into it more. But just to say, there's a bunch of things that I feel like it went on to influence, which probably in of themselves deserve a lot more time. But just to give you a vague idea, there was something called the Church of the Subgenius, which was around in the 80s and the very early 90s. And actually some version of it still exists today. And Devo were a little bit involved with the Church of the Subgenius. Okay. And they have this clip art figure called Bob Dobbs, who's just a clip art picture of a man smoking a pipe. And he's their religious figure. And they worship the idea of slack. But no one can really explain what slack is. But fundamentally it's kind of just like fucking off the world and just doing whatever you want. But Church of Subgenius, I don't know. I would definitely say if they existed now, I would consider them hipsters. But they definitely got some interesting things to say. And again, actually, there's a documentary about them on. There's a new There's two. There's an older documentary which isn't that great, and a new documentary which I think is up on YouTube now, which is worth looking at. And the other big one, I think, is the Cacophony Society, which is actually something I knew about long before finding out about Dischordianism, but it's definitely really influenced by it. And the Cacophony Society was a group. They came out. There was two groups. There was one in the sort of 70s, which was called the Suicide Club, and then the Cacophony Society kind of picked up in the kind of 80s and into the 90s, where they left. And the idea of the Cacophony Society was about sort of adult play, and kind of, again, it was quite Dadaist, and it was just about like making. So they were from San Francisco. They kind of made the city into a massive playground. Was kind of the idea, and they did a lot of pranks and a lot of sort of events. They're definitely best known, really, because one of their most famous members is Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club. And actually, Fight Club, the concept of Fight Club is totally Cacophony Society, just with violence. They didn't really have very much violence in the thing. But the idea of it was that they just sort of went and made up completely random events. Didn't really document them. It wasn't like everyone was taking photos and sort of celebrating each other. They just went and did all of this stuff. And so they did a lot of things, like they'd go into the sewers and they'd go on walks in the sewers. They walked up a lot of bridges, like into the tops of bridges. You could sort of break in. It was all kind of semi-illegal, but not. They did a lot of kind of almost like wide games around the city, where they'd just sort of they'd just say like, we're searching for this person, and they'd put wanted posters all over the city and stuff. And again, it was this thing whereby they were just using unusual, spaces that weren't normally used in this way to just sort of freak people out a little bit. They did a black tie dinner on a subway train in rush hour, and they just like, before everyone got out of work, they set up this big long table. They all dressed in ridiculously over the top things, and they brought all of this like food. And then obviously all of the commuters who just finished work just walked onto their normal subway, and there was a load of knobs
people
there
just having dinner,
in black tie.
Nice outfits.
They used to do a thing in the San Francisco Marathon where they'd dress as salmon and run against the tide, which I always liked.
Didn't they get in trouble for doing that?
Yeah,
because they were running into the people.
They got in trouble with a lot.
Yeah.
But the other thing the Cacophony Society did, which is a really massive thing that's definitely really influenced by all of this stuff, is that they started doing these things called zone trips, where they would basically not tell anyone where they were going, and they'd just make them all get on a bus, and they'd drive them out somewhere, and then when they got there, there'd be some stupid game or something to do. And the most famous ones of those, they used to burn a man at the end of it. And it turned into, over the course of time, the Burning Man Festival. That's all from the Cacophony Society. And it all came from, actually, an anarchist principle from this guy called Hakim Bey, who is not the greatest person in the world, but he wrote a really good book called The Temporary Autonomous Zone. And it's very much an anarchist idea about kind of taking a space and then just using it autonomously, as outside of the law and the country, and everything else. And I feel a lot of that kind of could be represented in a lot of punk shows, to be honest. Particularly things like the basement shows, where we take somewhere that would normally be I don't know, nothing, like a little bar that twats would go to, and turn it into a party.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, this has really gone on a long time, but just coming all the way full circle, the other main thing was the KLF, who were a pop band in, like we said, the very late 80s and early 90s. And they were very much influenced by Dischordianism. They had a bit of a history with it. There's two guys involved in the KLF, Bill Drummond and Jimmy Corty. And Bill Drummond particularly was sort of interested in Dischordianism, although I don't think... he definitely never considered himself a Dischordianist or anything, and he was much too young. He wasn't involved in it in any way. But he did the Illuminati Trilogy, which was the Robert Anton Wilson book that I mentioned earlier. They put on a play of it, which went on for something like 12 hours or something, because they did the entire thing. And it was directed by this guy called Ken Campbell, who I don't know very much about, but I really think I would like to, because when asked why he was trying to make a play of basically an impossible book to make a play of, and that was 1,000-odd pages long, and was going to take 12 hours, he said nothing's worth doing unless it's impossible.
That's
so I just
ridiculously
think
you.
a lovely sentiment. But yeah, Bill Drummond worked on that play, and I think Jimmy Corti went to that play, so there was like a Discordian sort of connection between the two. But they basically went on to have a pop career, just a real standard pop career, although it definitely came out of quite unusual places. But then they really just messed with people once they were probably the biggest. They were certainly one of the biggest bands in the world in the for the the couple of years that they were at their peak. And basically they did so many different things. They did a lot of things where they would release kind of statements, like they'd buy ad space and they'd just put weird shit in, like the NME and sometimes like the Daily Mail and stuff, because they just had loads of money.
And
so they would...
wasn't one of the things they did towards the end, which kind of precluded their like biggest silly prank, that on the night of the Turner Awards they announced that they were going to do an award for the shittest bit of art that year.
Yeah, they did.
And they were going to announce it on the steps of where the Turner Awards were being held. And they also, and the person they gave the shittest award to was the person who actually won the Turner Award.
Oh, that's right.
And they said, your prize is £500,000 in notes outside, stapled to this board. And if you don't come out and claim it by 11 p.m, we're going to burn it.
Yeah.
And she sheepishly ran out there at 11 and said, please don't get rid of my money, and claimed her shittest award of the year, as well as getting the Turner that day.
Yeah.
I don't know, and they just did that for the sake of it.
They did loads of stuff like that. But they continue. Actually, Bill Drummond particularly continued doing all of this stuff. Like he's still doing it. Actually, he's quite an old man now. But the most famous things that they did, which are definitely worth mentioning, was when they'd more or less finished. They decided they were going to stop. And they decided that they completely deleted their entire back catalogue, but this was at their absolute peak of fame. And they were on the Brit Awards 1992
oh my God,
or something. And so it was going to be their last ever performance, although they didn't tell anyone this. And they opened the Brit Awards, and there's a brilliant film. It's definitely check it out. It's on YouTube, because it's just like a standardised kind of, you can imagine, just really saccharine like Brit Awards opening. They show the outside of the Hammersmith Apollo or wherever they are, little drum roll, like really twatty person doing the voice, all that shit.
The Brit Awards,
and then it shows Right Said Fred. For like talking to a journalist. They're not actually, you can't hear them.
Yeah,
but it shows like
all
the stars are out, and it shows Right Said Fred, and then it shows Kim Wilde.
Yeah.
And then it says, and now to open the Brit Awards, the KLF, and the thing's open, and it's Extreme Noise Terror, who play a sort of cover of one of their songs, but just sounds like an Extreme Noise Terror cover. A song.
For those who don't know, that's grindcore metal, not the 90s rave that they were expecting.
Yeah, and with Bill Drummond sort of at the front on crutches for no reason, and I think in a skirt. Although
he wears a kilt. He's got a kilt on. Yeah. Okay.
And it just all falls apart. They're going all out of time. Everything's just going. The guitar solo
and he's
is
just
like
screaming gobbledygook over the top.
Screams whatever he thinks. And they don't really show the audience, but the couple of like peaks that you get, you can imagine their faces. But then the best bit is, just towards the end of the song, Bill Drummond just goes off stage, comes back out with like an Uzi, and just fires a gun at the audience.
Well, he fires blanks.
They're blanks, but it's not obvious. It's just a gun. He's just firing.
I think it's a machine gun. I think it's an old like machine gun that he happened to have.
And so again, it just sort of then the curtain shut. And all the people are clapping. No, they're clapping because they sort of have to clap because it's the Brit Awards. But the look on their faces is just one of absolute despair.
Yeah.
And then the other really big thing that they did, which I think is kind of how they're remembered, although I feel like in this day and age they've probably long been forgotten, is that they did actually burn £1 million. Which is and again they sort of did. There's some really interesting things where they went on loads of like daytime TV shows afterwards and did interviews about why because obviously the Daily Mail and probably all papers, they were just like these fucking idiots who've done this stupid prank. And and they just go on there and basically everyone's just like, why on earth did you burn £1 million? And they just go, I don't know. No idea, to be honest. We sometimes come up with different ideas as to why we did it, but we just felt like we had to do it, so we did it. And and that's like their concept. And there's a really brilliant one on an Irish daytime TV show, and the other guests are Def Leppard, and Joe Elliott is absolutely disgusted at the idea that someone has burnt £1 million. He really doesn't like it. But KLF actually, funnily enough, in literally the last couple of months, they've kind of become not active as in they're really doing anything, but they've started streaming some of their music on.
They've put it on Spotify, haven't they?
Not all of it, but some of it. and they've sort of released their videos and stuff, and their videos definitely are worth. The music doesn't really stand up. Like if you just listen to the KLF songs, you'll just think, oh, this is just a sort of fairly average 90s dance band. Although the more you listen to them, the more catchy they get. I kind of like them now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just to bring it full circle, that really through the KLF, although I wasn't much of a fan of them, I found out a book about them by this guy called John Higgs, which is more or less the KLF, the band that burned £1 million, I think is what it's called. But I don't know how I stumbled across it, because like I said, I wouldn't have read a book about the KLF particularly, but the description of it was, this isn't really about the KLF, it's about loads of really weird shit, and I thought, oh yeah, that's well up my street.
Yeah, I think on the front it says like Chaos Magic and...
Yeah, and I was into a bit of Chaos Magic at that point. I've gone through a lot of stages in this lockdown, it turns out. And so, yeah, and that book... You've just read it, haven't you?
Yeah, so I read it in the last couple of weeks.
I mean, that book is it's one of the best books possibly I've ever read. I would recommend it to anyone. It's just got so many ideas. It's so well written. It's so clear. It does a much better job of explaining all this stuff.
Yeah, it kind of touches on everything, like of Operation Mindfuck and Robert Anton Wilson, and it has like Alan Moore, who wrote V for Vendetta. Yeah. He's in it quite a lot because of his ideas around magic and.
There's quite a lot of stuff about Doctor Who in there as well, which I wasn't very interested in, but it might be.
Well, I think they only put that in there for the kind of synchronicities, as it were.
But yeah, it's a great book, and I would really recommend reading it. And there is still a sort of Dischordianism movement to this day. You have a look on Facebook. There's still a Discordian group, and they had a festival. There's a festival called Festival 23 that I think they'd done for a few years, which sounded like a bunch of hipsters doing weird shit to each other, but with each other, not to. But if after lockdown, if it happens, I'm definitely fucking going.
Yeah,
100%. There's just loads of weird shit. And so that's sort of Discordianism, my attempt at describing it. I'm sure this has been long, I'm probably going to cut it down, but I hope it's of some interest and sort of made sense to you. But I definitely would recommend having a little look at some of this shit, because it's really interesting.
Definitely. I mean, I have only gotten into it via Dave telling me tidbits about it, coming at me going, Siobhan, you were just in your own reality tunnel. And I'm like, what are you talking about, you fucking idiot? And
I don't think I was that much of a twat about it.
It depended on which arguments you were winning and losing as to whether I was in a reality tunnel or not. No, but honestly, it was just and you'd feed me little tidbits of it, and I'd be like, what are you fucking talking about? And then the more you think about it, I was like, oh, that's quite interesting. And then, like I say, it kept popping up in the documentaries we were watching. I read that KLF book and it was amazing. Robert Anton Wilson seemed like the nicest dude. And his ideas were just it's just a way of, like, especially as, like, I'm an inherently anxious person, so this idea of just being free, like, you're told, like, when you break down what you're anxious about, what you're worried about, you name it as a real thing, and then you've got these dudes saying, well, that's only real to you because you've been told it's real. It could easily not be real. It could easily mean nothing to you. And I think
it's definitely a good way of dealing with mental health, I think.
Definitely. Well, that in the KLF book, there's something that do the impossible or whatever, that thing. Bill Drummond kind of liked that, and he did the impossible by making it possible. You do one thing at a time, and before you know it, the impossible has been done. And he worded it as accept the contradictions. He every time he was about to go, like, do something he knew full well he wasn't necessarily talented or qualified to do, it was like, well, okay, I've been told that I can't do this. I accept that I probably shouldn't be doing this, and I'm going to do it anyway. And then you create something new and weird. I like it. Good. Very nice. Very nice. We should probably have some music.
We must.
So let's play a song. This band is called Fast Blood. They're a band from Newcastle, and this song is called Milo. It's from their self-titled EP that came out early last year, but it's coming out on a limited edition cassette via Cruel Nature Records on the 5th of March, so that's pretty soon. So go get that, give this a listen. This is Fast Blood with Milo.
Why do I keep doing this to myself? I keep on telling myself I'm not worthy. When I waited for this for so long, and now I can't face going through it. Sit back and watch me fall apart. This has never
I see.
Leave the auditorium.
It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
So it's that part of the podcast where we review a trashy film. And this week we watched Blood Diner from 1987.
Hello, fellow food lovers. I'm Phil Mignon, world-famous gourmet. The finest attribute of this quaint cafe is the marvelous cuisine. Only the freshest natural ingredients are selected.
The first ingredients we need are 2 stomachs from a couple of tramps.
Oh, and he's always pleased to serve you to your friends. Shouldn't that be serve you and your friends? No. Your gracious hostess will direct you to your table, where you will dine as if there's no tomorrow.
So, Blood Diner. This is the brief storyline. I hope this kind of sums up how amazing this film is. 2 brothers / cannibals / health food diner owners are on a wacky quest to restore life to the 5 million year old goddess Sheetar, aided by their uncle's brain and penis. That, believe me, if you watch it, makes sense, which is weird.
This is an exact description of the film.
The 2 set about getting the required parts, virgins, assorted body parts from whores, and the ingredients for a blood buffet. The adversaries are the police, the chief with a Russian accent, the player detective, and the New Yorker with an Australian accent. This is one of my most favourite films in the world.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most ridiculous films I have ever watched.
I've watched a lot of crappy 80s horror comedy films, and this might be it probably is the craziest.
This pushes the biscuit on every realm. Probably the only thing it doesn't do is its gore isn't very gory. But
I mean, they do a lot of. There's a lot of kind of attempts to do it. Like,
yeah.
There's, people like so at one point he sort of like splits someone in half lengthwise.
Oh yeah, true.
With a knife and stuff like.
It
is kind of gory, I think.
But I think one thing to be said about it is it's so ridiculous. It's so pushing what is acceptable to be in a film.
It's not politically correct.
It's not politically correct in the slightest. It was made on a super ridiculously smll budget.
It doesn't look like it was made on.
It's really well. That's the thing. It's really well made.
Yeah.
And it's. We'll go into exactly why you've got to watch it, but I cannot stress to you more.
Where to start.
You've got to watch this. Yeah. Well. I can start with the very first scene, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
The first scene is 2 kids playing with their toys in the lounge, and the radio's on in the background, and it's like, there's a crazy man running around, this is a quote, armed with a meat cleaver in one hand and his genitals in the other. There's a murderer on the loose. And then you hear the police kind of like, you hear rustling by the door even, you don't hear the police, you hear rustling by the door, and you think, oh God, the murderer's going to be at the doorway. And in breaks through the door the murderer, this man with a meat cleaver, and then the kids go, Uncle Anwar, how are you? And he drops the meat cleaver and he's like, everything's going to be okay, kids. He gives them both these necklaces and says, you need to hold on to these, it's really important. Goes out, gets shot by the police. And then the very next scene is the kid's older digging his body up out of a graveyard, and it goes from there.
Resurrecting him. Resurrecting his brain. So the uncle who is, I think, the greatest character in this film, just because every word that comes out of his mouth is just shocking and hilarious. But he's just a brain and a brain and genitals.
Well, it turns out I thought it was his brain and a spinal cord,
yeah,
but this person who wrote a synopsis seems to think it's his brain and a penis and a set of eyes to make it look like there's a character.
But he does talk about his penis a lot as well. He talks about his schlong. He's some of his lines. Just, I don't know. I don't really want to say them particularly.
Is it better if I say them?
Maybe I don't know. I let my schlong do the thinking for me and got confused.
But he says it's so like animated, and he's just like, I got confused, Georgie, you fucking moron. Yeah, and it's just this.
Yeah.
He's just so mean, and there's a. God, you can tell he's getting carried away with himself. So at one point there's a woman that they're building out of all these body parts, which is ultimately what he's told his nephews to do. and he's just going on a bit of a monologue. He's just like, oh my god, my schlong, what I could do to you, la 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 la, what a set of knockers. And he's just getting really carried away with the most un-PC rant, and he's just a jar. He's the brain in a jar, obviously getting a hard on for fuck knows what.
But surprisingly likeable, I would say,
But,
in a lot of ways. I think it's something about the accent. It's such an over-the-top accent. I think he said it was based on an Armenian person he knew or something.
Yeah, someone that used to work at the petrol station that was Armenian.
I don't know if it sounds like an Armenian accent or not. I don't know what it sounds like, but it's quite an interesting.
Well, so that's one of the things about this film, and that's why one of the reasons that it didn't get rated, so it became an X-rated film or unrated film, because they didn't like that the two nephews are so likeable that they said they're too likeable to be murderers. Murderers in these films are meant to be like hated and really obviously horrible, but you weirdly root for the two nephews in the entire of the film because they're so one's really dim-witted and the other one's like handsome and charming, and at no point do you really like, you kind of root for them. He's like chatting up a girl and you're like, go on, even though you know he's getting that girl on side to like offer her up to be murdered. Yeah,
I'm not really sure you root for anybody, but then you equally don't it's not
you
like
don't
you don't dislike them, but you don't necessarily. I don't think it's a good enough film to actually. You don't get involved in the plot really.
Yeah,
you just enjoy all the crazy shit.
Oh my god.
Of which there's an awful lot. So some of my favourite bits, which I'm probably going to just be completely random. There's so there's this weird theme where everyone's a vegetarian because they run a vegetarian restaurant, and they just so for example. There's one point where a load of cheerleaders become their victims, but they have to be a vegetarian cheerleader group, and then they go to a nude aerobicizing cheerleading session.
It was like a nude aerobic session.
Which is just absurd. And they go and they just shoot the lot. There's a lot of kind of random limbs laying around. They're often just like throwing like legs around, and arms around, and hands around. And stuff.
So I read something about this vegetarian thing. Whereas that was somewhat like meant to be a satire of, at that time there would have been such, especially in California, there had been this huge vegetarian like health food boom. And so this was meant to be like a little bit of an attack at all the like arseholes that were going vegetarian and vegan in California, because at that time it would have been like very health freaky. Look at me with my fancy avocado smoothie.
They're very confused about what that actually looks like though, because there's like some weird sort of, some of the people in the restaurant, because they keep going back to the cafe and it's always got the same people in there. And some of them are sort of like dressed like futuristic nuns. There's like a little gang of them. Some of them are bikers. There's like some bikers in there. There's just sort of these random... it's very odd.
And then they really take the piss because there's this absolutely fucking huge obese man who's like, hey, I'm the local person that rates veggie burgers. This veggie burger is really good. And he's fucking obese. Like, it's beautiful.
And he vomits.
Oh, God, he does a massive vomit. Which they actually made out of rotting food and didn't tell any of the extras. So when it got thrown at them, they were really surprised, and they did have something similar to sick in their mouth. Awful.
There's some really cool scenes in like an LA sort of punk club. Although very confused as to what punk music is, because the first scene in this thing, although all the audience are sort of like punky or kind of industrial looking or whatever, the band on stage is like the Four Tops. Yeah,
it's like a doo-wop kind of band.
It's sort of it's all almost like soul stuff.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's this guy Dino Lee.
Oh, so good.
Who I bought you his album a couple of years ago, and it's all right. It's got a couple of good songs.
I mean,
I wouldn't say it was not great, but Dino Lee is kind of, I think, is a genuine person who fronted a band in LA. Never really made it big, but got an album out and stuff.
Well, it's kind of crampsy.
Yeah,
but
and he's got a big penis at one point as well that he chops off.
Well,
like,
I think he has a sausage. I think he gets a salami and they actually chop it up.
Which I think was all real parts of his stage show.
Yeah.
But weirdly, his band are all dressed as Hitler, so I don't really know.
They were all Hitler mimes. They had white face, like a mime kind of style.
I mean, it's really
and
problematic,
like Charlie.
isn't it?
I think they were playing on it because I think he was dressed a bit Charlie Chaplin-y, but actually in a Hitler outfit. And they wrestled little Jimmy Hitler.
Yeah,
there's a lot of Hitler references.
So little Jimmy Hitler, the wrestler, who's not little, he's really big.
Oh, he's fucking huge.
Was a real wrestler, they said, as well. So
and he actually threw
and he really beat the guy up. Yeah. So as a slight sort of aside, which is quite interesting about pretty much the least politically correct film ever made, this film is extremely notable because the director is Jackie Kong, who is an Asian American female director.
Who at the time was about 24, 25?
Really young.
Yeah.
And basically was just sort of, was being treated really badly in Hollywood, wasn't really being given any good jobs, and just by pure force of will, I think, just got herself onto these various projects and just really fucking went for it. And I haven't actually seen any of her other films.
No, I haven't.
I don't think there's that many. There was a few from this time which star a lot of people in this one. But she's awesome.
And her work ethic is amazing, in as much as... So they had a small budget for this film, one of which couldn't afford to get proper actors, couldn't afford a lot of shoot time. So they had, I think, they shot it in, I think she said 3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah.
And in order to do that, she had to get all of her actors to rehearse for 3 weeks before. They weren't allowed to ad-lib. She was like, there's no time for ad-lib. And also, they weren't actors. They were people that she knew, people that were street people from LA at the time. Yeah. The main guy was in a band, and she said, you've got to come and act in my film. And he's like, I don't want to act. And she talked him into it, and he turns out he did a really, really, really great job being the lead guy in it. And just, it wouldn't have happened had it not been for her... like straight down the line idea, but at the same time she pushed every boundary she could possible.
Absolutely.
And she was just like, you know what, fuck it doesn't have to, in this male dominated whatever, I can make the most outrageous jokes about boobs and penises and what's right, what's politically correct. It can be she said, we watched the special edition, the extras on our DVD, to see an interview
Blu-ray,
with her.
darling, Blu-ray.
And she said that, I've not really done a lot of interviews about it, but I really wanted to come forward at this point and say I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Like, everyone thinks Jackie Kong is a man.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm a fucking woman. I had an almost all-female team behind me doing this film, and I want to tell people about that because it was shit then and not much changed. It's still shit for women directing. She said only 4% of directors are women, and it's still really shit. So she was like, I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So... massive props to her, but also she made a fucking ridiculously un-PC, unfeminist, un-okay film, and it's so good.
It really is.
Oh my god, I'm reading what I've written down. Some of the quotes are just horrendous. I'm so horny I could fuck a cow. There's a kung fu scene where the woman is completely naked and she's doing high kicks and everything is hanging out.
Well, I think that one's. I was going to say about that. That's quite an interesting scene, I think, because it really plays with the. So it's like a couple on. It's standard kind of. Horror movie fare where there's a couple on a beach and they're kind of getting down and dirty and the guy's really keen and the woman's kind of not so keen, and then he takes all of her clothes off. And then the murderer guy sort of turns up on the beach, and
he fucking runs.
No, the guy doesn't run. I think he collapses in fear.
Oh yeah.
And then the woman, who's like you say, stark bollock naked, just is really good at karate.
Yeah.
For all of a sudden,
she starts
and so she just beats the shit out of him on the beach. So there are I think there's little winks to the fact that this isn't, whilst unquestionably isn't a PC film. There are little winks to the kind of intent, I think, of the filmmakers in this.
I think it's just meant to be so outrageous and stupid. So at one point, the chef's got a mate who he talks to at the bar, who's a mannequin for no reason whatsoever, and no one treats any differently. So every character in the film talks to this puppet like he's just one of the other actors in it, but he's a mannequin for no reason. They also has a really good soundtrack because they managed to. There was a doo-wop label called Doo-Tone, I think it was called, and one of them managed to persuade them to give them licensing for $100 a song or something. So a really small bit of their budget was able to be spent on the most amazing soundtrack. And it makes you think the film is like, I don't think they'll. She words it as timeless. I think it's very clear. I think it's very clear when it was made, but it makes you feel, because it's shot really well and the music's really good. You can get into this film really easily and think it's a really good film. Oh, yeah. And then when you remove yourself from it a bit and you realise that it's a brain talking about how good his schlong is and someone else saying, right before I put my sausage in you. And it's just like...
It doesn't present as a super low budget film.
No.
It doesn't present as a very high budget film either, but it's for me, it's just at the right level.
Also, last thing I want to mention, and I can't believe we've not mentioned it, the body that they create, so out of all these different body parts...
Shitter. Basically.
Sheetar, when she comes to life, they've created her with this mouth on her stomach that looks like a big vagina with teeth, and that's where...
Which again, I feel like filmatic language-wise, that probably tells you where they're...
And that becomes the main, weapon that she eats through.
Yeah.
And so, look forward to that.
I couldn't... you must watch it. It was written by this guy, Dukey Flyswatter, who's actually got a real name as well. What's his real name? Michael
Herschel.
Sonnier.
Oh.
No. Oh, actually, we haven't even covered any of that. So Dukey Flyswatter is in a band called Haunted Garage, who are still going. He's when he's interviewed in the DVD features, he's the guy with the vampire teeth.
Oh, I thought he was
He's just like a
Herschel.
little old dude with vampire teeth.
Oh, okay.
And so he wrote it. He was in Surf Nazis Must Die, which is a fucking brilliant film. And he pops up in a few things as well. But he's been in this LA punk band called Haunted Garage for the whole time. And they're sort of like Crampsy, again, a bit of Guar in there, like a lot of like a big stage show kind of thing. But he's really awesome. And so he wrote the thing. And it was initially going to be Blood Feast 2. So Blood Feast was a late 60s. It was basically the first ever gore film ever made by this guy Herschel Gordon Lewis, who made all of the first
that's where I get
gore
that name
films.
from.
He's really interesting. The first Blood Feast is great. It's really like, it's 60s. They really go over the top. He did The Wizard of Gore, which is really cool. A lot of them have been remade actually. The Gore Girls, a lot of gore in his titles, I think. The Gruesome Twosome, I think he did. But but Blood Feast was always his most famous film, and like I say, it's considered to be the first ever gore film. It's the first film that ever had like loads of blood in it and stuff, and it was a real sort of grindhouse classic. And this was going to be Blood Feast 2, but for some reason they decided it wasn't. And then later on, sometime I think in the early 2000s, Herschel Gordon Lewis himself made Blood Feast 2, and it was horseshit. So they should have stuck with this.
Well, they bought the license, so they were intending on it being a.
Yeah.
They bought the licensing to Blood Feast.
Yeah, which
And
couldn't
so
have cost
the
very
point,
much at that time.
So the point was they were going to make a
sequel.
But
Yeah.
I don't know why they called it something different. I don't know.
Well, no, they decided that no one knew what Blood Feast was, so it would be better if it was just its own film.
And I don't know what I've never watched Blood Feast, but I liked that Jackie Kong, when she made this, she made an effort never to watch it before making her film, because she was aware that bits of it might be a redo, and she was like, I don't want it to be anything similar, and I'm sure it wasn't.
and she refused to allow any of the script writers or the producers on set because she knew that they would try and fuck with her vision of the film, which I think, again...
I really liked her.
She's great. She's just brilliant. So, I mean, it's probably a stupid question, really. I feel like this is probably one of your favourite movies. What score are you going to give it out of 10?
I want to give it a 10, but it's not perfect. But then
not?
But then what is perfect? Fuck it. It's 10 out of 10. And I'm saying that if only just to get someone else to watch it, because it is just so stupid. My only doubt is that when we tried to watch it a second time when we were drunk, it's not one you think you should watch it when you're drunk. But I don't think you should. I think you do need to watch this either stone cold sober or on the way to getting drunk.
I think we watched it when we were Lord of the Tins level drunk.
It's not an easy watch
fault.
if you're not quite in the mood. I think if you're stoned, it'd be amazing. It's a fucking brilliant film. It's so stupid. Please just watch it with have some funny about you. If you don't find it funny, then to be honest, you're probably not my friend. Because it's the right level of absolute stupid. Yeah. Like, don't take any bit of it seriously. The whole thing's so stupid. I love it. I think it's so good.
The first time I ever saw this film, I owned this on VHS, and I think I was about 17 or something when I watched this film. And I would say if there's no chance there's any 17-year-olds in this podcast, and if they are, they're probably like 20 times more intelligent than I was when I was 17. But if you are a 17-year-old boy, watch this movie. It's a fucking banger. I really enjoyed it then. So in a similar way, I feel like I keep saying this about completely different films, because I said that's the same thing about Lust in the Dust. This is just exactly the sort of film that I yearned for when I was kind of collecting VHSs when I was younger, and just sort of like getting into like stupid horror movies, because I don't like horror movies that are scary. I only like stupid ones. And this is just perfect, I think, in that context. And I really genuinely do think it is perfect. I give it a straight 10 without even
it's
consideration.
So
to be honest.
I remember when we first watched it, I said that's probably going to be my new favourite film of all time. Yeah. It's up there with a few others that we'll definitely rate on this in the show.
Yeah, we need to do a really shit one, because we haven't done enough shit ones. So next week, expect a really shit film.
We'll do something really
There's something
shit
to look forward to.
Yeah.
All right, let's play a song then. I'm going to do another one of these songs from a long time ago that aren't represented on Spotify. This is relatively obscure, and even to me, it's a song that I really like by a band that I don't know a great deal about. They were around in the early 2000s. They're called Eyos. They're American. I'm not actually sure where they're actually from, but this song is from a compilation album that I got from about 2006, I think, called From All the Days Are Numbered. And it came out on Harlan Records that was run, I think, by someone who was in Sufi Nun Squad, who were sort of relatively known at the time. And I just absolutely love this song. And I think that their album, this band's album, has actually been repressed and I think is freely available, and I think is up on Bandcamp as well. But I'm fairly sure this song isn't available anywhere. And generally they're not really represented very much. But yeah, I just really love this song, and it jumped into my head, so I thought I'd throw it in. There's not really any big story behind it. So yeah, this is Eyos with the song Blind Guardian. Welcome back to the Breakfast Punks podcast. Thank you so much for hanging around this long. We're just going to make our goodbyes and then we shall leave you alone, because I think this is going to be a bit of a whopper.
I guess if you've got any ideas or anything you think we should or shouldn't be doing, as always, please let us know. Best way is probably via shamcityroasters@gmail.com, as Dave probably checks his emails a bit better than I do. Joke. Yeah,
or via Instagram.
Yeah, that's true.
At Breakfast Punks Podcast. Just get at us. If there's any disgruntled Discordians out there who, like I say, have stumbled across this because they saw the word Discordian in it, I apologise if I've butchered everything, but please feel free to email me and tell me all the things that I got wrong, and I'll happily update everyone next week if they're not already sick of it. I think I just want to say we had a conversation in the week about what this podcast kind of is. Because obviously we've the subject matter today was kind of a little bit more researched, I suppose, whereas before we've just done a bit of a chat, and I think we agreed that we kind of like it this way, that it's just this podcast isn't really about anything.
Yeah.
And I suppose I just wanted to acknowledge that, really.
Yeah, I think it's more about doing something when we weren't doing anything. Well, that sounds like we weren't doing anything, but it's creating a thing. It's about whatever we fancy talking about. And I think the joy of us as individuals, not me and Dave specifically, although we are joyous, but the joy of any individual is that you're interested in so many different things, and we're not experts at anything. We didn't know how to make a podcast when we started, so that's quite clear. Yeah. So I think the point is just to, just talk about whatever.
Yeah, we've kind of given ourselves a basic structure whereby we can kind of, there's no rules, and I kind of like it that way. But I would be quite interested to hear if anybody's enjoyed any particular version of this podcast better, because it's really hard. We don't know,
yeah, and I think we're it's a good opportunity to get into something different or learn about something different, and this 2-week space gives us the opportunity to do that. So if there's anything you're particularly interested in, or you think, gosh, you need to go and look into this is really interesting, it might be quite fun just to take up something for 2 weeks and let you know about what we found. That's kind of the point of us doing this anyway.
Yeah, and definitely any trashy films.
Oh yeah.
Send us your favourite trashy
Although,
films.
yeah, we need some trash to divide up basically my 5 favourite films that
Yeah,
are
we're
coming
kind
up.
of,
So
but anyway, this has definitely gone on too long. So thank you so much for listening, everybody.
We will end with one last song. This song is from a band called Bruise Control. They're from Manchester. This song is called Bottom Feeder. It's from their new EP, HMRC, which has just come out online. Go check it out. This song is amazing. So yeah, Bruise Control with Bottom Feeder.
We'll see you soon.
Goodbye now.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye now.
Bye.